how close or how much consideration did you give to taking a quarterback? Because this was the highest that the Atlanta Falcons had drafted in 13 years. And you hope you're never back in that position, right? So sometimes organizations will say, even though we still like Matt and we still want him to be our quarterback, we have to, at this position, draft the quarterback for the future, because there's not many success stories that come out of the late into first round superstar quarterbacks.
Yeah, so obviously everything, when Terry and I got to Atlanta, everything was on the table. And so we did our due diligence on all the quarterbacks or anybody we thought that would be available at number 4. And it is a big decision, but it was a very unusual year. There's a couple of things, there was a lot of quarterbacks, and and who knows, how the future plays out for all those guys. But just because you're picking the top 5 doesn't guarantee you'll get the right quarterback.
All right, welcome into the Cris Collinsworth podcast. Our friend Richard Sherman still trying to figure out exactly where he's going to play football or broadcast on television. Who knows where that's going to be, but we certainly wish him well. We've got a great program for you here today. The Atlanta Falcons' new head coach, Arthur Smith, is our guest. And for those of you who don't know Arthur, his father is Fred Smith, who is the founder and current CEO of FedEx. So you can imagine the life that he grew up with. He was a football player. He's an all-state high school player, played guard, went on to play in college, had an injury, got into coaching. Unfortunately, he was also a coach at FedEx Field. So your father's company is on the stadium where you're coaching. So he had to make the decision to quit, move on to somewhere else, start at the bottom of the bottom, and begin to work his way back up, which is exactly what he's done. And now, after an incredible stint as offensive coordinator, the Tennessee Titans, now he's the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. And the story really doesn't stop there, because the Julio Jones trade back to his original team, the Tennessee Titans, was a part of the whole offseason discussion. Kyle Pitts, the incredible tight end out of Florida, was the draft choice. Did they ever consider taking a quarterback there to ultimately replace Matt Ryan? Because very seldom have the Atlanta Falcons drafted at the number 4 position overall. And of course, the news of the week really is Carl Nassib coming out as the first openly gay player, an active gay player in the National Football League. So we have a lot to discuss today, and we're looking forward to this conversation with the Atlanta Falcons head coach, Arthur Smith. Well, it's our privilege here to have the new head football coach of the Atlanta Falcons, Arthur Smith, on our program. And Arthur, first of all, congratulations, man! This is a great opportunity for you. I know you've slugged your way through many a place and many an opportunity, and did all the classic quality control jobs and all the different things you had to do, college and NFL, to get here. It has to feel pretty good.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I feel very fortunate to be in this spot, and it's exciting. It's exciting. Atlanta's an exciting place to be, and like I said, I just feel extremely fortunate to get this opportunity.
There are so many different things to talk about with you and your journey up the ladder. But you started off, you were a guard, right? You played on the offensive line, an all-state guard coming out in high school. Go to North Carolina. Unfortunately, had had foot surgery, I think, in your first year of playing there. And really, it didn't go on from there. At that point, did you kind of begin to think, well, maybe I would like to do some of this coaching?
Yeah, no, I'd always wanted to stay in football as long as possible. Yeah, I always joke. I got to work with Bruce Matthews, but Bruce was a guy I looked up to, and I was like, damn, he played 19 years in offensive line, and that was kind of my, every lineman's dream. I looked up to, and it comes to an end at some point, and it definitely put a new perspective when I got the foot injury. And ironically, Robert Anderson was the one that fixed it.
Really?
So I had a couple surgeries, and then I went down to Charlotte, and it's a small world now. He's become such a vital part of the NFL world. When guys have foot and ankle injuries, they go up to Green Bay to see him. But I'm always very thankful for Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, it's been such an interesting journey for you where basically you became a graduate assistant at North Carolina, learned right away what coaching is about, right? Because you guys got fired collectively as a group there. John Bunning lost his job. And did you ever think at that point that, maybe I'm just going to have to go do something else, that this coaching thing may not work out?
Well, I certainly saw probably the ugliest side of the coaching profession that year. I was a graduate assistant, and like I said, once I was done playing, I wanted to be a college coach. I had grown up going to the Orange Bowl, and so I had always been a huge college football fan, and that was kind of my goal. And then that first year, I was like, all right, well, this didn't really work out, but and I was like, all right, I knew I wanted to stay in football, and I had a scouting internship up in Washington, so I thought that was going to be my path until it all changed about 4 months into the job, and Joe Gibbs asked me to come back over to the coaching side to do the defensive quality control breakdown.
Yeah, you had that job a couple of different places. You kind of bounced around it. And the funny thing about it is I think it's in part your own humility. Not everybody knows your family history, right? The fact that your dad, Fred, was the CEO and founder of FedEx, and you come from a family with 9 different siblings. And I'm sure every one of them have a very different path in their lifetime. But being a football coach, has to be a little bit different. Was anybody else in your family in sports? Are they currently in sports? Is there any other sibling involved?
No, but my brothers and I, we all grew up playing football. My younger brother was actually started out as a quarterback at Miami and then transferred to Memphis and became a safety. He had a pretty quick position change, quite like yourself. So if he didn't go to receiver,
you got that right.
The backfield. So, although I didn't realize you had one of the longest touchdown passes in college football history. Is that correct?
I did. My first
99 yards.
First game I ever played, I tied the record, right? You can't have longer. You can have a 109-yard kickoff return.
Right.
But the longest pass is 99 yards. So I'm one of like 6 guys. So it's always like the ultimate trivia question. That everybody thinks I caught it. But anybody who knows how slow I was didn't think I ran 99 yards anyway. So then it ended up, finally, I was the one that threw it.
Now, were you and Malarkey in the same recruiting class?
Boy, if we weren't in the exact same, we were close. I spent a lot of time with Mike Malarkey, who I know had a role in your come up the ladder as well, because he was one of the head coaches, one of many head coaches at Tennessee that kept you on and kept you in place there. Yeah, but Moo was he was one of my boys at the University of Florida. Yeah.
No, I just thought it because both y'all were quarterbacks coming out, correct? And then
yeah.
So he went tight end, and then you went wide out. So.
Yeah, they at the time that I was at Florida, Steve Spurrier, we were a wishbone team. And so that's the reason I signed there. I was like an option quarterback. And then Steve Spurrier came in my sophomore year as offensive coordinator, and he took one look at my arm and he goes, how you feel about wide receiver there, big guy? So flipped over, and it ended up being the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I'd have never made it as a quarterback, but had like 10 touchdowns as a sophomore under Spurrier. Yeah. And then, believe it or not, my next coordinator, my senior year, was Mike Shanahan. So Shanahan's 26 years old, and he literally is getting carded at every bar we would go to after games, and we're just strolling right in with no problem at all. And now Shanahan goes on to be one of the greatest coaches of all time, and Malarkey ends up as a head coach, and Spurrier, we know that story. So
yeah, that's awesome.
You'd have thought we'd been good. We just still weren't very good. You, this is a great story to tell, and I don't know. I'm sure you hate telling the story, but for every person who grew up with a famous father, and I'm going to throw my kids into the mix here a little bit as well. There are bad things that come with that, right? There's an assumption that anything that you do was somehow given to you. There's an assumption that you're not going to be a hard worker because your family has money. There's assumptions that work against you all along that path. Can you just give me a little bit of the story of when you were in Washington and basically decided to quit because, FedEx Field was the name on the stadium there, and you wanted to blaze your own trail, right?
Yeah, no, I know after, getting, I guess it's definitely opens a lot of opportunities up for you. There's no question about that. And you got to take advantage of them. I mean, you've seen it the other way where people, they waste a lot of good opportunities provided for them in life, whether, certain schools or you get your foot in the door in a certain industry. I just knew if I was legitimately going to move up that I needed to get out of Washington. It was an unbelievable start. Got to work with some really good coaches, worked under Joe Gibbs in that 07 season, which was a very unique year for multiple reasons. And then the transition to Jim Zorn, and the defensive staff pretty much stayed intact. And then Greg Blosh and Jerry Gray were two guys that really helped me out. And so I just knew that, it kind of run my course there and needed to go somewhere else.
Yeah, you ended up going down as a defensive intern at Ole Miss.
Correct.
And I think it was Mike Munchak who talked you back into the offensive side. Obviously, you played guard. I think you played a little defense along the way, but most of your career was at guard. Talked you back into the offensive side. And it's interesting to me how many offensive lineman type players end up being head coaches or offensive coordinators, because if you don't understand those 5, count the tight ends, 6 guys up there in protection schemes, you don't have a chance to run an offense.
Yeah, it definitely gives you we're all, we go to our own personal experiences but try to see it through multiple spots, but it definitely helps when you're in the offensive line. You definitely understand that the function of the 5 guys and what it takes up front, and how the communication needs to go, and really how that unit needs to gel in order for an offense to be successful. And so, I feel fortunate to have been on defense for 4 seasons, 3 in the NFL and 1 in college football. That was very beneficial to me as well. Just some of the things that we had to defend that year I was in college, and some of the issues that you have in that game and how it translates and the kind of players that are coming through at the time. And then Mike Munchak, I can't say enough good things about him. The year I drew the protections for him and the conversations that he would have with me as he would red pin those protections, it taught me a lot. So I feel very fortunate. Mike, and then Russ Grimm was another guy that had a huge impact. Russ is one of the smarter football coaches I've been around. Another O lineman. Maybe I'm biased there, but it definitely helps having that perspective.
Russ Grimm's still one of my all-time favorites. When he was coaching in the Super Bowl, he came out because Bruce Springsteen, the Super Bowl halftime lasts like 45 minutes. And so Bruce Springsteen's playing, and all of a sudden you see Russ sneaking over into the back out on the field so he could watch Bruce Springsteen. It was great.
Yeah. So he's another guy that was your era. As a player, I've worked with a lot of guys in your era that have all had a huge impact on my coaching career.
Yeah, but it was interesting. So Mike loses his job there. He's the one that got you started. Ken Wisenhunt comes in, takes over as a head coach. He retains you, gives you the opportunity as a tight end coach to come in there. Of course, Wiz knew a little something about that. Another tight end right behind him, and Mike Mularkey took over for Wisenhunt, and he's the one that gives you an opportunity to continue on. Then Mike Vrabel comes in, and Mike Vrabel keeps you on as a head coach still, or as a coach in Tennessee. And then ultimately your big shot comes when Matt LaFleur goes from offensive coordinator to head coach of the Green Bay Packers. And I've heard Vrabel tell this story of you sitting there at his desk or calling him or whatever it was, that you came in, you wanted that job. You felt like at that time that you were ready for that job. Tell me about what you did with Mike to contact him and basically apply for the job.
Yeah, so when Mike Vrabel retained me, it was a question he asked me when we interviewed down at the Senior Bowl, what was my long-term goals? So I had told him what my long-term goals were. I wanted to be an offensive coordinator and eventually be a head coach. So it wasn't coming out of left field when Matt got that Green Bay job. He and I texted. I believe I asked him, was he going to be in the office the next day? He said he was, because we were kind of on a break there. Right after the season, usually, people get out of there for about a week or so. And so I had come in, I had typed up some stuff about my philosophies, about, leadership, offensive philosophies, how to run a staff and all the things that would entail being the offensive coordinator. And I had just printed out, I had it ready, and he and I sat down and talked for a few hours. And then, he had talked to other people and went through his process, and thankfully he gave me that opportunity.
Yeah, it was ended up being good for him because you come in and it was you end up in 2019 after taking over and turned that Titans team into the highest scoring team they'd had there since for 16 years. Created a great opportunity for you as well. But I think one of the guys that will be forever linked to you now is Ryan Tannehill. Ryan comes over and was okay. I mean, was a solid quarterback in Miami, but he comes there with you, and not only do you take Tannehill, but you also take Derrick Henry. And in the 2 years that you're there, Derrick Henry leads the National Football League in rushing. So there's a very defined kind of what you're trying to get done, at least with that football team. Tell me a little about Tannehill and Henry and what your vision was when you got started there.
Well, that's another thing. I'll always be going back a little bit. Why I always will be very loyal and grateful to Mike Vrabel, because the way that 19 years started, we were kind of in transition. Marcus Mariota was still our starting quarterback, and
right.
And I love Marcus and got all the respect in the world from him. And the way the season went, we started out with a big win over Cleveland, lost a close one the next week, didn't play on Thursday night very well at all. Came back, ironically, to Atlanta, and we were about 2-2. And in the next 2 weeks, we did not play well. And so we went through a quarterback transition. So there were a lot of lessons learned, and I can't say enough about Mike Vrabel's leadership during that time. And then we transitioned to Ryan, and then we won a couple close games, I believe, against the Chargers and the Bucks, and then kind of took off from there. So kind of got to experience a lot in the first month and a half of the season, and came out the other side, and really Ryan took that role, and probably, and I don't want to speak for Ryan, but he had a different perspective too, because we had traded for him. So it wasn't like he had chosen to come to Tennessee and he had to sit as a backup, and so it gave him a different perspective and different role. And when he took over, it just clicked and it fit, and what we want to do, I thought, really fit his skill set, and really Derrick, it was practicality. Derrick is a outlier, and the number of carries he has, and when he gets going, it's impressive to watch. So it all kind of gelled together, but there was some adversity that went along the way before that too, that gave me a great appreciation for the job.
What do you think? Now, obviously, you can watch Derrick Henry and go, yeah, I'd give him the ball too. But, with Tannehill coming in, and one of the first games I remember him playing, or maybe it wasn't, but I just remember this play, was he ran for the end zone and sort of dove over the top and flipped his way into the end zone, and the team kind of went crazy, right? And in my mind, I was like, that may just be the moment for him that the team sort of becomes his.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was against Jacksonville on a keeper, and that was the cool thing about Ryan's skill set is he is a great athlete, and most of these guys are play quarterbacks. Ryan can run with the football, and he took off, and defense turned their back to him and got out of there. And it was about a 20-yard gain, and he got hit, and he kind of helicoptered over. really that one, and then the 2-point play he had against Kansas City in the game at home, which was a crazy game, and we went back and forth, and he went into the end zone, and he took a heck of a shot and got in for us, and it was a huge play, put us up by 3. And but those 2 plays really stick out, kind of his early run there.
Yeah. So as much fun as it is to talk about Tennessee, and I know that was home for you for a long time and for your kids, but this opportunity is really something in Atlanta. Unfortunately, you get to Atlanta and talk about salary cap hell. I mean, everybody knew it, right? You didn't even have enough money to sign your draft choices for this coming year. So then the Julio Jones conversation all starts. Can you give us a little bit of the take of how long it took you once you had gotten there to understand that you were going to have to make some big moves financially with this football team to get it realigned?
Yeah, I think pretty early on. Once Terry and I got started down there, I mean, the reality, we knew the issue with the cap, and then obviously the cap went down this year, coming off the bizarre year. You're dealing with a pandemic, the cap actually shrunk. So we knew there was going to be some big decisions we'd have to make coming up. And so in the way everything worked out, we feel pretty good. I mean, I think it's pretty much well documented now that we feel like it was a win-win, with the salary cap and Julio going to Tennessee and us right now being able to solve our short-term issue with the cap. So, and we still got some other moves, down the line you're going to have to address. But feel really good about where we're at right now and going into the summer.
It's interesting with your family and growing up. I'm sure budgeting and money and running a business and all of that. I mean, the NFL really is now with the salary cap. It's all about resources, allocating resources, budgeting. How do you plan ahead? How do you plan for injuries? Some of that business background that you grew up with has to help you some in this job today.
Well, yeah, it certainly helps. Being able to talk to my dad about things, about leadership and management, and come up with plans for the future. He doesn't get into the X's and O's, and I certainly don't get into the airplane logistics with him either, supply chain issues. But it is nice, Chris, to be able to have those conversations and not just a father-son role, but hopefully, look at him as a business mentor. So, and that's what the challenge I love about the NFL is, it's so competitive week to week, and the margin of error is so small, and I love the strategy behind it too.
Anybody who's ever made the final jump to head coach always has a little story to tell of, and you really haven't even gotten started in this one yet, but, I got into coaching for this, right? I loved it. I love being with the players. I love coaching the details. I love studying the film. I love putting together the game plans. I love, across the board. And then you become a head coach. And now you are everything. Every time somebody catches a cold, every time somebody has something going on with their family, every time there's any issue within the team, any time that they want to change something with the travel arrangement, it all flows through your office. And as even in these early stages of it, have you started to feel the change that comes with being a head coach?
Yeah, you do. And again, I had worked with for enough guys and had some good conversations going on the job that at least it gave me some perspective, and I knew what I was kind of signing up for. The worst thing you do is take a job and act like you're some kind of victim because you get this new set of problems, which is ridiculous because like you're talking about, everything is going to roam through your office. And I embrace it. Certainly, some days, you have more than others that come across your desk, and you just got to be able to make quick decisions. And you got to be able to allot time and do a really good job with time management so you can get to the stuff back to football that also comes along with being a head coach. But it's definitely, it hits you pretty quick. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I would say you are ready for it. Speaking of getting back to football, I do want to ask you a little bit about your team this year because it's such an interesting sort of transition. There were a lot of people that were uncertain as to whether or not the Atlanta Falcons were going to draft a quarterback this year with the number 4 position. Mac Jones was there. Justin Fields was certainly there. You could have traded back still and probably gotten either one of those. How close or how much consideration did you give to taking a quarterback? Because this was the highest that the Atlanta Falcons had drafted in 13 years. And you hope you're never back in that position, right? So sometimes organizations will say, even though we still like Matt and we still want him to be our quarterback, we have to, at this position, draft a quarterback for the future, because there's not many success stories that come out of the late into first round superstar quarterbacks.
Yeah, so obviously everything, when Terry and I got to Atlanta, everything was on the table. And so we did our due diligence on all the quarterbacks or anybody we thought that would be available at number 4. And it is a big decision, but it was a very unusual year. There's a couple of things, there was a lot of quarterbacks, and and who knows, how the future plays out for all those guys. But just because you're picking the top 5 doesn't guarantee you'll get the right quarterback. And so, if you're number 4, do you get the first quarterback in the draft? Well, that certainly wasn't the case this year, right? I mean, you go back to 2008, and they were number 3, and they selected Matt Ryan after Jake Long and Chris Long. He was the first quarterback taken. And, the first quarterback taken in the draft, give or take, it's about 50-50 whether that pans out for multiple reasons. And then as you go on down the line there. So, just kind of bucking conventional wisdom, you're right. I mean, you've got to look hard at it, and we did. And but we feel very good about Kyle Pitts and what that does for the future. There's a lot of different models to look at. You can look at what Andy Reid did when he got to Kansas City, took over a 2-14 team in 2012 and 2013, and they got Alex Smith, and they had a great run. And then that team was well suited when they traded up to make the transition to Pat Mahomes. He certainly walked in there, and that's a big part of it too. You got to make sure it's the right environment when you do make that change to quarterback with the young quarterback. Certainly, you could make a strong argument that Matt was certainly helped by having a veteran center in there and Todd McClure. He had Roddy White. They got Tony Gonzalez the second year. That certainly helps a young quarterback with some stability. And I know there's a lot of different. I mean, you look at the Peyton Manning route. He certainly played early, took his lumps, and then took off. So everything was on the table, Chris. And there's no knock to any quarterback we didn't take or would have taken if they had fallen. And that's not a knock to them. It's just we feel good about our strategy, and we feel very confident in Matt Ryan right now.
And now without Julio, who I'm sure they were sort of like the ultimate going away present you threw back to Tennessee, but something that is going to fit that team nicely, and nobody knows that better than you do. But you also sort of have a replacement part right now, right? You've got that big body receiver to go along with some of the smaller, quicker moves of a Calvin Ridley. But how does a Kyle Pitts fit in right away? Because you were known for playing a lot of tight ends in Tennessee. Jonnu Smith ends up going to New England, but there were 3 different tight ends that were always a part of the mix down there. But Kyle Pitts is a different animal, right? I mean, he is one of those unique kind of characters in football that a lot of people now, myself included, can't wait to see what all you have planned for him.
Yeah, Kyle is certainly a unique player. There's not a Florida tight end bias, I would say. I mean, you could try to make that argument, but he is, and they played him all over the place. I was really impressed watching the film what Dan Mullen did and how they used him at Florida. Because usually you're pretty skeptical when you see a tight end graded that high, and you're watching the film and you're doing your due diligence, and you realize he's a very unique player, and he can do more than what a traditional tight end can do. But like I said, what we put on Kyle's plate so far, we've got high expectations for him, and he's got the right mindset, and we'll let it play out organically. We'll bring him along the right way because, and he knows that. So we're definitely excited about using Kyle in the right way.
Yeah, the thing that impressed me, I always thought with him going down the field, it was almost anything was possible, seams, goes, whatever the case may be, the catch radius, he would always be able to flip around and make the catch, and huge arms and all the different things. Sometimes it's harder for those big, tall, rangy guys to be stop and go route runners as well.
Sure.
So I would say of what I saw from him on film, I would have thought a little bit more of anything vertical down the field, slants, whatever you want to talk about, he's got that. Let's turn him into a route runner on some of the stop and come back to the quarterback kind of guys.
Yeah, certainly we'll try to push the limits with Kyle, and like I said, he's a very mature guy. He's only 20 years old. Played 3 years. It's a great credit to his family and everybody that he's been around, and to him. And I just certainly wasn't as mature as Kyle was at 20 years old. But we're excited, and like we're talking about, I mean, his route tree was definitely impressive at Florida, and what we've seen so far, I think that we'll continue to try to push the limits for him.
A lot of people. So you trade Julio, who's one of the great players in the history of the league.
Yeah,
I mean, he's going to be, and you knew that, and everybody understands in exactly what was happening. Had some injury issues, and what it did, though, was it gave you an opportunity to see what was next. So a lot was put on Calvin Ridley last year, and he answered the bell. He had 8 games over 100 yards, including 4 of the last 5, and 5 of those 8 came when Julio wasn't in the lineup. So I've heard the argument, okay, it's a big deal to go from being the number 2 receiver to the number 1 receiver now without the protection of Julio. But he has really sort of proven himself as a number 1 guy without Julio in the lineup, hasn't he?
Well, they're different players. I think that's again, it goes down on the surface. Everybody wants to go 1 for 1, but they're not the same players. And how people defended Julio will be very different how they want to defend Calvin. They just, I can't say that enough. Like, we're not asking Calvin Ridley to be anybody but Calvin Ridley. And it's no different than, offensively, you got to adjust. Like last year, I'll just go back to Tennessee, for example. You play certain game plans when Taylor Lewan was healthy, certain matchups you have and protection and certain things you want to do, but circumstances where he got hurt. And so we never asked Ty Sambrillo, and then he got hurt, and we put David Quisenberry in there. We didn't ask David Quisenberry to do things that, we try to play to everybody's skill set. And to me, that's the part of coaching. And just because they both play left tackle doesn't mean they're the same player. And we were able to have success with David Quisenberry in that left tackle. And that's no knock to Taylor, or they're just different players. But that's part of the coaching. That's reality in the NFL. So I don't look at it as, hey, we got to replace this player and it's 1 for 1. I mean, we'll be very different offensively than they were last year, and they've been successful in the pass game. And that's no knock at Dirk Cutter. It's just we'll fundamentally be a little bit different how we play, and we'll never ask somebody to be somebody they're not. So we're excited about the pieces we have, and we feel very confident going into the season.
It's probably the guy that I would be most interested in right now is Mike Davis. Clearly, you're going to come from a system. Doesn't mean you're going to do it here, but you come from a system where you could rely on a running back to establish a presence, play action, bootleg, whatever you wanted to do off of that. Not many people know about Mike Davis. In Carolina, sort of the backup, but he is a big, strong, thick guy for someone who's only 220 pounds or whatever that he is. Do you think that Mike Davis, who now really has to sort of become in and be a bit of the answer in the running game, can give you some of that same presence that you got with Derrick Henry?
Yeah, just going back to, Chris, I would never, that's unfair to any player to ask him to be. We'll play it a different way than we played. You can't ask somebody to be Derrick Henry. We just need him to be Mike Davis. And as you said, he's been very productive. He's a physical runner. He's another guy that's been pretty damn good as the season wears on and as it gets late in the games. He does have that physical presence. But we have Cordell Patterson, who we feel can give us some carries back there. Quadre Olsen. We'll have good competition back there. And we'll be a little bit different approach. And that's not, I can't just print out the blue, say, hey, we're going to go, here's the game plans we use in Tennessee. It's a completely different team. And I think you get in trouble when you think that there's only one way to do something.
Yeah. Talk just a little bit about Matt Ryan and what you've seen so far, and he's a great guy. My guess is you two already have a pretty good bond. You're kind of the same person. Both of you are just, neither one of you have huge egos. You're just kind of there to get the job done and be able to do it. Your early impressions of Matt?
Yeah, Matt, I can't say no good things about Matt Ryan. He's a guy that's had a lot of success in the NFL. He's got great humility, very direct in his communication, which is great between a coach and a quarterback, especially between a play caller and a quarterback. Can't say enough about his work ethic. He's authentic, he's genuine, and I feel very fortunate to get a chance to work with him at this stage in his career.
Yeah, the other part of this football team that now for me takes on some real interest is you bring Dean Pease back out of retirement. Mm-hmm. Good move, by the way. It was a good move. So Dean Pease, if you want to compare him to somebody, and probably if people are listening this deep into this podcast, they're sort of football addicts anyway. But I think Wink Martindale is a decent comparison. In that Wink in Baltimore, somebody's blitzing, you just don't know who it is. And Dean's the same sort of guy, right? That you can you don't really know what's going to happen back there, but somebody's going to come after you and there's going to be a lot of different looks to it. How hard was it to talk him out of retirement, and B, to come back in, and how confident were you in this guy that you knew, obviously, coaching with him at Tennessee?
Yeah, no, I was, Dean reached out to me, so at least I knew he had interest. So that's how the conversation started. And I always joke, and I've been around enough coaches now, if you don't retire early, like Jimmy Johnson, or if the longer you hang in, I joke with this with my dad. Once you get to 70, you're still working. You're probably going to work forever. It's just kind of the way you either got to retire early, and or you start pushing the 70, and those guys never stay retired. So I've obviously seen it with Dick LeBeau and some of the other coaches I've worked with. But Dean reached out, and I feel very fortunate. First time going through this as a head coach and calling the plays on offense, you need somebody experienced on the other side, and there's not a better person to help me and help this team than Dean Pease. So, and like you said, I mean, we'll bring pressure. Dean's done a great job wherever he's coordinated defenses, from high school to college to in the NFL. And like you said, that Baltimore defense, and Dean's been a part of that, and obviously now Wink, and that's a challenge. Wink does a heck of a job. I got a lot of respect for Wink Martindale.
One of the hard things, though, when you look at Baltimore right now, they're sort of built from the back end forward. They're not paying superstar players on the edge, and they're willing to let free agents walk out of there. But that secondary is rock solid, and a lot of veteran ball players back there that can get the job done. You guys, on the other hand, are going to have a lot of inexperience on the back end, just from the standpoint. I think there were 4 safeties on the team last year, and now there's going to be new ones. You're going to have a draft pick probably in the mix. You've got young cornerbacks on the outside. The defense hasn't been very good. I mean, let's just face it. It hasn't been the strength of this football team over the past few years. I think they've been in the 20s, probably high 20s the last few years. As you look at them, right, you've got good players. I mean, you've got Grady, you've got Dion, you've got some guys that can play over there. Where do you see the opportunity on the defensive side?
Well, yeah, certainly, at the corner, right? I think A.J. Terrell is a terrific young corner. We're excited to get to work with him. On the back end, some of the free agent signings we made that I think will really help us, as we surround some of the pieces that were already there and some of the young draft picks. On the back end, signing Eric Harris and Deron Harmon, those signings don't get a lot of attention. They don't happen right away in free agency, but those guys are quality veterans that played a lot of good football snaps, and they definitely bring your football IQ up back in the back end. And they'll definitely help Richie Grant or Jalen Hawkins and some of the young safeties that we have. And inside, and then Fabian Moreau, he's another guy we signed as a free agent. He helps with some depth at corner. He's got some good experience playing in Washington. And then in the middle, with the linebackers, you talk about Deion Jones and Foye and Michael Walker and Brandon Copeland and guys that we feel like we got a good mix in the inside linebacker room. And then up front, it's a little bit, what they've done in Baltimore is you got a lot of volume guys, a lot of length, and you never know where these guys are coming from. And so that's one thing I think we'll have in Atlanta. We signed Barkevius Mingo on a one-year deal. We got Steven Means, got Dante Fowler out there to rush the edge. And you got Grady inside and Tyler Davison. We got a good mix. So we're excited. We just need them to play as a unit, and you've got to adapt. If you don't have four guys that can just pin their ears back and rush the passer, you got to get creative. And I don't think anybody does it as well, or certainly Dean's has a history of coordinating a lot of creative and sound defenses. So we're excited.
That he has. Probably the one that everybody reaches an age where you have to make decisions, right? Alex Mack has been the center there for a long time. And, man, it sure is nice to have that center position covered by a guy that could turn around tomorrow and coach your offensive line. There aren't just many of those guys walking around the league right now. But he was older, goes off to the 49ers this year. Tell me about that decision.
Yeah, I talked to Alex. Alex I got a tremendous amount of respect for him. It's no different than any of the veterans that have been there. Cardo Allen, all these guys. You got to make tough decisions. And Alex, obviously felt like he still had good football. We couldn't afford to bring him back. That's pretty much what it came down to. And but gosh, he'd done a heck of a job in Cleveland, and I thought a big turnaround they had early on here is when they signed him in 2016. I think that was a big signing for them here in Atlanta, and he certainly left his mark here. But as we transition now to Matt Hennessy and we drafted Drew Dahlman, we signed another free agent move, Josh Andrews, that gives us some flexibility at guard. He's also a guy that can play center if we had to. You have to. That the business is so critical. So I think the other thing that helps too is what allowed us to bring a guy like Drew Dahlman in is the rule that you have to have 8 linemen up on game day. So if you do have a backup center only, whether that's Matt or Drew, it allows you a flexibility where 2 years ago you never could have done that.
You unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, got a high standard in your division, right? You got a football team in Tampa that has arguably the greatest player in the history of the game. The entirety of that team has basically come back. The entirety of that coaching staff has come back as world champions. So you find out right away where you rank in the National Football League. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, that's the life in the NFL, and you got to embrace it. It's, New Orleans is, they've won this division 4 straight years, and they still. There's a lot of history. Sean Payton done an incredible job down there, and one of the few coaches that has sustained success over a long period of time in the NFL. So between Tampa and New Orleans, and we know what Carolina's building up in there in Charlotte. So it's a tough division, but they're all tough. It's the life in the NFL.
As you look back on your career, tell me, everybody has a turning point, right? Everybody has something that was sort of the moment I think back on as being the point that really gave me a chance. What was that moment for you?
It was probably when, I'd say 2. I'll cheat here. Probably Mike Mularkey giving me the shot to be the tight end coach. I've been Mike's assistant and learned a ton from him, but I felt great appreciation and a big responsibility because of, how he wanted things done in that room. And then when Mike Vrabel gave me a shot to be the coordinator. So both those two were huge moments for me. And like I said, I got so much respect for both those guys and thankful for the opportunity.
Arthur Blank's the one ultimately has to pull the trigger on you. As you're going through the interview process with him, what was that like? You had to have some feel for a guy that had established himself to the extent that he had in the business world and having those conversations. What were your interviews like with Arthur?
Yeah, so on the back end, before I took any of these interviews, I tried to do my own research. I read his book, and talked to people who had worked in Atlanta. I wanted to do my due diligence as well before I ever stepped in any of those interviews with any of the teams, as much as I could. And so I knew what his values were and what he was about, and felt very comfortable from the beginning. Going through his history in his business life, going at Home Depot and going through that. And the book gave me a lot of insight. And then just right away, the first interview was in Zoom. Felt pretty good about it. And then when I got to Atlanta and went to his house to interview in Buckhead, I felt pretty confident walking out of the interview that we had hit it off, and that if he gave me a shot, that I would probably take it. So.
You were a hot candidate, obviously, deservedly so. Was there anywhere else that you felt like was close that you had to sort of, man, if that one comes up, I'd have to think hard about that one?
Oh, I just try to take it all in. Like I said, a lot of life is timing and luck, and those were the jobs that were open in this cycle, and so. And you never know if you get a shot again. So I think I felt fortunate that everything kind of fell my way.
At the end of everything, as you look back on it and you're thinking back about your family and growing up and the circumstances that surround it, in many ways, for me, you're one of the greatest head coaching stories I've ever seen. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways this works against you and doesn't happen, right? Now you're here and you got an opportunity. Is there something that you took out of having your family, its history, FedEx, 9 siblings, all of that you think is at the core of who you are?
Well, I just think I give a lot of credit to my parents and my family, the way we were raised, and I think a lot of things helped me prepare for this job, being in a big family. Constant chaos around the house. We were one of those families that everybody was always welcome. We always had friends over, or cousins, and I think some of the chaos has certainly helped me deal with a lot of people in this job. So, like I said, it's all I've ever known, and it's they're all excited. I know this. They definitely sold a lot of tickets in Atlanta when I took this job. So that probably helped from a business perspective.
If you're looking for chaos, you're in the right business. I'll say that for you. Hey, before I let you get out of here, there was news yesterday about Carl Nassib, the first openly gay player to ever publicly let it be known during his playing career. I think that anybody who's been around the National Football League long enough knows that there have been gay players in the National Football League for a long time. There has been a pressure to not say things. We're in a new day and age. Thank God we're finally here. What do you think the significance of that is? And will you talk to your team about it at all?
Well, it's certainly significant. And like you just indicated, I think football, if you take a step back and it's been a huge part of your life, clearly, and my life, I think from the outside, I don't think people realize how welcoming a football locker room is. It's the ultimate melting pot. If you really look at this country, I mean, think of the characters that are in a locker room. I think that's so unique from other sports and how everybody does get along. And if you can play and you're a good person, nobody really cares what anybody's personal life and what they do. But it certainly was a huge statement, and it took a lot of courage for Carl to come forward. And we are at a new age, and I think we're definitely more accepting, and certainly gives you hope as you're raising kids. It's a more welcoming world. I don't know how it was for you, raising 4 kids, but certainly I've got 3 young ones, and it's a different climate that they'll grow up in than the one that I grew up in. So. I have a lot of respect for Carl, and any conversation, we encourage our players, to speak up, speak for themselves, and it's an open dialogue, no matter what the topic is.
Yeah, I can remember a roommate of mine, an African-American gentleman, I won't say his name, I'll let him tell his own story, but it was startling for me to hear the story of him basically saying that when he drove to his house in a nice neighborhood in a gold Mercedes, that he would get pulled over a minimum of once per week, a minimum. And I said, what? He goes, yeah, just sort of the way it was, and wasn't bitter about it at all. Just sort of, that's just the way it was. I said, I would have lost my mind. How do you not lose your mind? I've just explained to him, yeah, this is my car and that's my house right down there. And, and unless you've lived it or you've been in that locker room or experienced, I just felt like one of the great advantages I had in life, and I'm sure you feel this way too, is that you had to live in that diverse environment. Not that all of us didn't make mistakes in that diverse environment and have conversations that today would make us uncomfortable, but we all lived it, survived it, and came out much better off for it at the end of the day. Yeah,
and I think that's going back to football in the locker rooms. It's just the friendships you make, and it breaks down so many socioeconomic barriers that, in my experience, certainly you go back to my family, and that's one thing my brothers and I love playing football. It's part of the reason my dad kind of steered us towards it. I mean, there's very unique, not a lot of sports that you have that. And certainly as you get going and high school obviously can be depending on where you're at and what school you're at. But when you get to a big college football locker room, you're going to get a lot of people from all walks of life, and it opens up your eyes. And you have a lot more empathy, because like you're talking about, I never experienced anything like that, but it opens up your world, and you hear other people's experiences, and like I said, it gives you great empathy, and you try to make sure you're always open-minded and helping whatever you can. Just because I haven't seen it personally, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, and clearly it does. And like I said, there's nothing like that locker room, and the barriers it breaks down.
Arthur, can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on and be with us today. I'm happy for you, cheering for you. I hope it all works great, and I know you and your family are going to have a great time as in Atlanta and head coach of the Atlanta Falcons.
I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
All right, I want to thank Arthur Smith for being our special guest here today, and we hope you will subscribe and review this podcast whenever and wherever you may be listening to it. And we have some tremendous guests upcoming as we now begin this final scream towards the beginning of the 2021 National Football League season. I am pumped for that. We do the first game on opening Thursday night. And we do the last game of the season with the Super Bowl. So it's going to be a great year. Looking forward to it. And thanks for tuning in.